General Hodges, good evening.
Hey, how you guys?
All righty, doing fine. With a bit of luck, in about 2 minutes or so, we will also have Yehuda with us joining. And thank you very much for taking the time tonight. It is quite a precious evening, and it's quite a sensitive time for Ukraine, as we have seen both in today's news as well as in recent days. We thought it's a good idea to talk about logistics today, but at the same time, we also heard now from many sources they want to have a little brief update, given the fact that the HIMARS system has come into play and is in theater and being employed, and at the same time, the terror bombings by the Russian side continue. Shall we give it a little framework, given the fact as to how you see the current theater and the current setup, and then move to logistics? What suits you best?
Yeah, that sounds good. And thanks for the privilege you guys have given me here.
The
First,
privilege
of
is
course,
ours.
yeah. Well, let's ask in 10 minutes if you still think. So, obviously, right now there are very important meetings going on in Elmau in Germany with the G7. Addressing a lot of issues, but clearly it's against the backdrop of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. And then here on Wednesday, we'll see the beginning of the NATO summit in Madrid, where once again, one of the dominant topics will be Ukraine and what can the alliance be doing to help in this situation. On Sunday, the Russians launched missiles into downtown Kyiv, hitting apartment buildings, killing and injuring, once again, innocent Ukrainian civilians. And, of course, this is not an accident. They did this right as the G7 is getting started. So this is a great big FU from the Kremlin to the West, saying that they have zero respect, and they're doing this, of course, to put pressure in hopes that the unity of the West will crack and that we won't support Ukraine anymore. And I think actually we're going to see a continued unity of the West, continued support for Ukraine, and that actually, even though there's tough days right behind us and tough days ahead, I think by the middle to the end of July, we're going to see a significant change in events as the effects of all of the artillery and rocket launchers that are being delivered to Ukraine begin to be felt. I think that the Russians have nothing else they can do other than shoot artillery right now. And I think this is going to crack. And that I sincerely believe that by the end of this year, we will be back to a 23 February line.
Okay. We've had discussions with a number of other counterparts in recent days. Some are a little bit more skeptical, but most have now come around to understanding that the change in weapon systems, both the standardization of NATO ammunition, which is starting to take hold, but also the change in weapon systems provided to Ukraine, lead to a different battlefield. The provision of HIMARS, on the one hand, seems to have an immediate impact. With a bit of luck, if ATACMS were to be delivered, it might have even a more significant impact. But it seems that the logistics machine of the group of 45 countries is working at full tilt, as opposed to what the Russians had expected.
Yeah, the Russians made 4 calculations prior to launching this attack on Ukraine back in February. They had assumed that they would have a total force advantage, superiority in terms of numbers and capabilities and so on. They believed that they would be able to isolate Ukraine from the rest of the world, from the West, both physically isolating from the sea, but also that the West would not want to get involved. And they also believed that they would get a twofer out of this, that they would break Ukraine and that they would break the alliance. They were so sure of that. And then the 4th calculation that they made was that whatever challenges or casualties that they suffered, that the benefits for them would be so much more. In other words, there would be more gain than pain. Those were the 4 calculations that they made before going in. Of course, all four of those calculations turned out to be completely wrong. And instead, we now are in a situation where they have 85% of their land forces are committed in and around Ukraine, and yet they have not been able to win. They haven't been able to achieve hardly any.
I'm going to try to kick in here as well. I'm not sure I'll be able to maintain this connection, but we'll try. Can you hear us, sir?
Yes, I can hear you.
Excellent. All right. Sorry, you were talking about the committed forces around Ukraine that have yet to deliver substantially, I assume.
Yeah, well, it takes time. I mean, these are not hammers that we're talking about. These are sophisticated, high quality pieces of equipment that not only you have to train on how to employ them on the crew level, but then commanders have to understand how to employ them. And then, of course, there's this whole separate maintenance for them. The American 777 howitzers, these have a lot of hydraulics. You have to learn how to do it, just like with anything else. This is not about can the Ukrainian troops learn how to do it. Of course they can. There's nobody in the world better at them than learning how to use new equipment, but it still takes time. So I think what you're going to see, the full weight of all of these capabilities being employed now over the next 2 or 3 weeks, is going to start making a difference. They're going to be able to destroy and disrupt Russian artillery and Russian rocket launchers who are not as well trained and who do not have the same capability. And then, of course, getting the ammunition necessary to keep these guns in action is going to be an important part of this. But I'm excited, actually, as I think about what's going to happen. As we've already seen a few videos recently of the first HIMARS employment, what that did, the precision that comes from these weapons. So we don't have to match the Russians in tube for tube. It's a different level of capability. And as Ukrainian commanders become more and more confident and comfortable with these systems, I think it's going to be a very, very hot July for Russian forces.
Sir, there's a lot of people who come in the room. They get very despondent. They seem to be really upset about why aren't all of these items and weapons platforms coming online right away? And some of us try to say to them exactly what you just said. It takes time, and they want to have a concentration of force where they have all of the new toys that they've been offered and given. Is that a fair assessment? That just because you're not seeing them deployed immediately, HIMARS is a little different because they obviously had some work on that in the background. But is that a fair assessment to make? That a lot of people think that it must be really simple, but I mean to really utilize them and exploit their capabilities. There's got to be a lot of training on it, no?
Yeah. The good thing is that Ukrainian soldiers, the artillerymen and rocketeers, they already understand the principles of artillery and fire support. I was in Estonia about 5 weeks ago, and that was when there were Ukrainian soldiers already in Estonia going through training on a howitzer there. And I said, how long will it take them to be ready to go? And they said, well, since they already are trained on artillery, it'll take them about 2 weeks to learn how to use this particular howitzer. And so when they finished, they left Estonia, went straight back to Ukraine, and got into the fight. The German Panzerhaubitze 2000, there were 7 from Germany and 5 from the Netherlands. This is an exceptional howitzer, but it's also as many German systems are, it's very good, but very complicated. So there's maintenance and a lot of things that have to be done, and you can't just hop in it like a rental car. The Germans had said it'll take about 6 weeks to learn for the crews to become proficient on the howitzer. Ukrainians asked if they could cut it in half to 3 weeks. They're at the German artillery school. The Germans agreed, and after about 1 week, the Ukrainians said, I think we need the full 6 weeks. And so, Germany was prepared to try and shorten it. And as it is, I think they still finished in about 5 weeks, and those howitzers then deployed with trained crews into the fight in Ukraine. So it's different technologies, different capabilities, but I have seen Ukrainian employment of new technologies having instant impact. Now, it's a fair criticism to say, why the hell didn't we do this 2 months ago? I agree. I think most of us have been frustrated that the U.S. administration and other governments were hesitant to push forward some of these weapons because we kept deterring ourselves, worrying that somehow if we gave a particular weapon that would push the Russians over the edge. And it's clear that the Russians do not need provocation, but it's also becoming clear finally that there's nothing they can do about it. I mean, really, other than what they're doing right now, the only other thing they can do is to employ a nuclear weapon, which they're not going to do. So we're having to make up lost time. The good news is there are a lot of howitzers and rocket launchers in Ukraine now, with more to follow.
Amazing, sir. One question, one point that comes up quite a lot, and maybe you can shed some light on, is Colonel Vindman came on. I'm sure you said this. A lot of people said there'll be a culmination to the efforts that the Russians can bring to bear, and now Western intelligence analysts have leaked or have produced documents that talk about the Russians getting to the end of their tether. What does that even mean? Like, what does it mean? They don't have any more combat troops to deploy? They're running out of ammunition. Is it a confluence of factors? And is that the point where you suspect the Ukrainians will conduct a more fulsome counterattack and exploit it this time, as opposed to the counterattacks they've done, which have been limited in scope?
Okay, great question. I agree with those who say that Russian forces are exhausted, that they have serious manpower issues, morale problems. They're still searching around for a commander. The Russian Navy, frankly, does not seem to be a factor. I mean, they're hiding on the other side of Crimea because they do not want to deal with Ukrainian Neptunes and Harpoons. So I don't think it's likely that we're going to see any sort of amphibious operations aimed directed towards Odessa. The Russian Air Force, they fly in airspace over Belarus and over Russia, launching rockets and missiles into apartment buildings, but they are not. It doesn't seem to me that they are making any real contribution in support of Russian ground forces. So there's just not much else that they can do because they don't have the trained manpower. I see maps like everybody else that have icons for the BTGs all over the place. But I think we shouldn't be confused about just because you see an icon representing a unit, don't assume that represents a fully manned, trained, equipped, ready to go BTG. In fact, I would say the vast majority of them are not. So they don't have the capability, in my view, to launch any kind of a major offensive. Instead, all that they can do is what they're doing right now, just to continue to try and rubble cities, inch forward where they can find opportunity. Now, for sure, there's no doubt that Ukraine is suffering casualties every day under this bombardment. There's no doubt they're suffering casualties, but the Russians do not have the ability. They don't have the logistics behind them to push forward in a more effective assault. Now, so what does this all mean? I think it means that they are. Let me say it a different way. We know that war is a test of will and it's a test of logistics. And it's clear that Ukraine has the stronger will. Their soldiers are defending their home country. They have a lot of military age men and women still in Ukraine that need to be trained, but that they're available. So Ukraine has a different manpower challenge than does Russia. Russia is looking around for people. They're throwing bodies into a fight that have less than 2 weeks of training. That's not going to be an effective force. So we've got to help Ukraine figure out how to destroy and disrupt the Russian artillery, but also to disrupt the ammunition. That's the problem, or the flaw in my analysis, is that I don't know how much more conventional artillery and rocket ammunition they have, how much longer they can keep doing that. So that's people could fairly criticize my analysis because I can't answer that question. We do know that they're well below 50% on their precision weapons, but it's the conventional artillery and rockets. I just don't know how much they have. The final part to answer your question is that Um, I believe that the general staff is waiting for that opportunity. Now, this means you have to take risk. You have to conserve combat power, not so much artillery, but armor, fuel, ammunition, infantry, the things that you would need engineers to launch a successful counterstroke. And so they're watching for when the Russian forces do culminate in this phase, and they're looking for that opportunity. And I believe the Ukrainian General Staff has done a very good job of what we call operational security. I mean, we're all dying to know what's the plan, what are they doing? We shouldn't know. We're not entitled to know that. And they've done a good job of protecting that information because they don't want the Russians to have it either. And I think the potential is there that by the end of this summer, we're going to see successful counterattacks by Ukrainian forces because the Russians, this test of will, they don't have it. And I think they're going to crack.
Do you mind going to some hands, sir?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Absolutely. Well, we'll go with finance, Melania, then Raver.
Thank you very much, sir, for coming to the guest speaker. Really appreciate it. I wanted to ask you about the Ukrainian combat engineers. We've seen, as far as I can tell from my layman's knowledge, pretty impressive work between their civil and military. I can't tell the difference. The whole place is a war zone of fixing things up pretty quickly. Ukrainian forces and civilians seem to be able to get across rivers pretty quickly, between it being their home country and whatever else, when Russians seem to be getting killed quickly doing these things. So could you talk to us about how they're doing and if they're able to train up more of these things? You meant more of these people who, as you mentioned, are really important for any major offensive, as well as just maintaining their war footing as it stands.
Yeah, thank you. I've always believed, and I was infantry, I've always believed there are never enough engineers because what the engineers do, their three basic functions is to enable mobility, survivability, and then, of course, counter mobility to stop the enemy's mobility. So three different, very important tasks that require hard work, some planning and coordination. You need materials, you need mines, the ability to cross rivers under fire or under pressure is very difficult. And one of the things that's I've learned watching the last several months is that most of the rivers in Ukraine are not ideal for river crossings. I mean, they are the flat areas. They're not. It's difficult to find the right kind of bank, if you will, on both sides of the rivers. The famous river crossing by the Russians that was shattered a few weeks ago, that area, very difficult to find places where you can establish bridges and have vehicles concealed and then brought forward. So this is hard work. And I think the Ukrainian engineers have done a good job in all three of their tasks, both mobility, which means repairing roads, repairing bridges, clearing the way for transport. The counter mobility, obviously, stopping the Russians from being able to make progress either through the use of mines, other obstacles. This is hard work. And then the survivability, the huge networks of trenches and bunkers and other things that they've done to help provide places where from which soldiers can fight. So I hope that, in fact, I'm sure of it, as Ukraine is, the army is so involved in the fight right now, we have to be thinking about what will our requirements be 6 months from now. So they've got to be investing, and this is very hard. You've got to be investing into education and training of junior officers and sergeants, because you're going to need them in the next 5 or 6 months as the ones who are in the fight now become killed or wounded or exhausted. So that's an important part of it. And the skills required for good combat engineers are very important. Fortunately, many of them are resident in civil society. So you've got people that have the skills. Now you got to get them into engineering units.
And General, thank you
Thank
for that answer. And we actually have a member, really important member of Ukrainian civil society with us, Melania Podolyak, and she's an activist that works for the Serhiy Prytula Fund. She probably has a question for you. Melania, you have the mic, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Lieutenant General. We've met a couple of years ago at Lviv Security Forum, if you remember. It's good to hear from you again. Thank you for all your contributions and expertise. It has been extremely helpful and informative. The question I have has to do more with the Russian side of it. I was wondering, well, my opinion is that one of the larger parts of Ukrainian success has been that we have had our fair share of experience in the last 8 years. And we've learned a lot, and that's why our military, we know what we're doing, at least, it's tough, but nevertheless. But how can you kind of analyze, and what do you think about the Russian ability to learn? How fast are they? How fast they learn from their mistakes? And should we expect some, more advances from their side just because they're learning from their mistakes? Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, Melania, very nice to hear your voice again. And I look forward to when we can do the Lviv Security Forum again very soon. That's a very good question. I believe that Russians, they trust systems. They do not trust people. And so when the system fails, they have a difficult time reorienting, figuring out what happened. One of the critical parts or critical elements of learning is acknowledging that you made mistakes and having a culture where people say, okay, I screwed this up. I didn't anticipate this, or we didn't execute like we should have. To learn requires a willingness, an acknowledgement that you have to learn and fix things. And so I think my sense is that Russian military culture is not conducive to doing that. So fortunately for all of us, they still, after 4 months, they have not figured out a lot of the problems that they demonstrated in the first few weeks. And so they have defaulted to the one thing that they do know how to do, which is employ endless amounts of artillery against civilian targets. That's all that they can do so far. So, but they're not stupid. They'll eventually start figuring certain things out. Now, I believe that the Russians have 4 strategic tasks that they have to deal with right now. Number 1, they have to reorganize and regroup in order to get some sort of victory. They've got to find something to claim to demonstrate to their own public. And I think that's what they're trying to do right now. They're trying to get to the point where they can say, okay, we finally denazified Luhansk and Donetsk, and then, probably go to some sort of pause there. The second thing is I believe that they are very, very concerned about a color revolution, and they are focused on making sure that there is no revolt inside Russia. Of course, I can't see it, but I hear enough stories, enough anecdotes about unhappy parents of soldiers and sailors that were lost. I mean, you can't conceal all this forever, and you can't keep up the facade forever of what's actually happening. And so I think the Russians are having to devote a lot of energy and time to preventing a revolt at home. Their third strategic task is that they have got to stabilize their economy and find new markets, because they are desperately in need of, because this is also connected to stopping a revolt at home, is the preventing the sanctions from having effect on the population. Now, there's lots of reports out there that the Russians, they got more money, they had more income from gas and oil sales, more revenue than even before the war, but they're not able to spend that. And that's an important difference. These sanctions are having an effect. So the Russians are trying to figure out how do they stabilize their economy while all this is going on. And then the fourth strategic task they have is to reconstitute the power, the capabilities back to pre-conflict levels. I mean, they have suffered huge losses of people, much of their best equipment, and obviously huge amounts of their ammunition. What's interesting is that in order to do most of those, they're all connected. You got to have money to prevent the revolt at home, to keep people happy, as well as to reconstitute power. So they have some real challenges, and that's why I also think that we're not going to see a massive breakthrough somewhere or dramatic changes to how they're fighting now, because of these other tasks, strategic tasks that they're having to deal with. So Melania, that's a little bit long. I apologize, but I just don't see them having the culture required. Let me tell a short story I heard from a Vietnam veteran, a boss I had one time. He said, Ben, three things saved the U.S. Army after Vietnam. And the U.S. Army, we were a mess after Vietnam. We had so many sergeants were killed, officers were killed, morale was terrible. He said three things saved us. Number one, it was the creation of the National Training Center, where you had the toughest, most realistic training, where units would go there and get crushed until they got better. Secondly, the creation of the After Action Review, the AAR. This sounds simple, but it was a change of culture, where leaders and soldiers had to do critical self-reflection and acknowledge what had gone wrong so they could fix it. And then the third thing he said that saved the Army was the education of our sergeants, of non-commissioned officers, that invest in their education. I don't see any of those three things happening in Russia in the next 50 years, let alone the next 6 months.
Thank you very much for your in this case, it's always, in my opinion, the longer the answer, the better, because it gives the better insight. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Great. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your constant support for, U.S. national security, and through, of course, supporting Ukraine's national security, because we are interconnected and they are so important. My question for you, sir, is in the last 24 hours, we've seen, two significant strikes on Ukrainian territory. One towards Kiev that was targeting a mixture of military targets and residential targets, where Ukraine was able to successfully intercept 10 out of the 14 Russian missiles, and this horrific attack in the center of Ukraine with no military targets. And I guess my question for you, sir, based on the success we've seen with the U.S. Army being able to train HIMARS in only 3 weeks, of a program that normally takes 12 to 16, what would it take for the U.S., do you think, to give and train Ukrainians on Patriot missiles? Because I think this would be a solution to help protect these civilian centers, which the Ukrainian air defense is having trouble to do, just based on the sheer size of the country and the number of threats they face. Thank you.
Yeah, CJ, thanks. And by the way, I would appreciate it if you push back on me any things I've said about the artillery and rocket launchers and my expectations of how this is going to change. Given your expertise, I would love to hear that, because I want to make sure I'm accurate in my assessments. So we should have started helping build up the air and missile defense capability of Ukraine from before this all started. I mean, we knew it was coming. Now, I have to say, I did not anticipate the Russians would be launching missiles wholesale into apartment buildings and shopping centers. I didn't think they were bashful about it. I didn't think they would do it so openly and brazenly. But what we have learned is we also do not have adequate air and missile defense inside NATO. I mean, there is one U.S. Patriot battalion for all of Europe. Germany and the Netherlands have Patriot. Spain has Patriot. Sweden has Patriot now, but Lithuania has NASAMS. There are other systems out there. The U.S. Navy has Aegis underway, but also Aegis ashore. The point is, none of us has enough air and missile defense capability. And as you know, it's the launcher, but it's also the sensors, the network of sensors, and who's calling the shots literally on making decisions about what to engage. I hear people talk about why don't they get Iron Dome from Israel? Iron Dome is designed for a completely different type of threat. So there is no one silver bullet solution for this, except that we've got to help them develop and get more capability inside Ukraine to thicken the defenses, if you will. But also, and this is where I hope the administration will change its policy, most of these missiles are coming from outside of Ukraine. They're being launched from aircraft over Belarus or over Russia, or from ground systems inside Russia. So absolutely, as somebody asked earlier, why don't we give them ATACMS that could range deeper into Russia and hit where these doggone things are coming from? So it's a comprehensive effort to protect Ukrainian cities and people from these kind of strikes. I don't want to endorse a particular platform or system, but for sure, part of this long-term investment, and I think I've seen this from Secretary Austin and Deputy Secretary Hicks, is that a long-term investment is part of the U.S. plan. So you have Ukrainian officers and NCOs come back to Fort Sill, for example, to the Fire Center of Excellence, and start training on various systems that we have.
And the ATACMS, if I may just add, I cut out earlier. I apologize for the poor audio quality, which we all suffered from. But yet again, the ATACMS would actually give deep strike capacity, not as many in the media have portrayed, predominantly into Russia, albeit that there are legitimate military targets there, and Ukraine has always, just like in the early days, constrained itself to them, as opposed to the Russians. But there are significantly deeper located maintenance facilities of the Russian army, which are extremely important for their artillery, and their munitions depots, which they could more easily reach, and with the rather silly, as a colleague of ours always says, rather silly weapon, this massive overload of ammunition and deep penetration into the ground capacity of the ATACMS, that is a different weapon than just the Gimlers, isn't it?
Yeah, the range and the precision, as well as the warhead, make it very effective. And I think I understand why the administration has been reluctant to do this, but I think it's misguided. And I have some optimism that that policy will also change in the next week or two. I mean, that's kind of been the story here over the last 4 months. Is most of you will remember that we were arguing first, do we give Javelin? That was finally done. Then it was like, oh, do we give Stinger because we might provoke the Russians if a Russian helicopter is shot down by a Ukrainian soldier firing an American-made Stinger. I mean, that seems so silly now, and I think that policies like this will hopefully change to enable Ukrainians forces to be able to do exactly what you talked about, to go after these vulnerabilities that would wreck the entire supply chain for Russian artillery and Russian missile launches, is go after those vulnerabilities.
We have a number of hands up from people who also have served, including Raver. Please, Raver.
I'd like to ask you a question about command, and specifically about the weight of command on these Ukrainian brigade commanders who have so much responsibility to make sure things don't go south. And I think you're uniquely positioned to tell us about that type of level of responsibility.
Well, thank you. And the way you asked that question, I have a sense that you have some experience yourself. First of all, it's exhausting. I mean, it's not a 9-to-5 job; it's 24/7, and you're all of them are dealing with the threat of rockets or artillery landing on top of their bunker, or catching them out in the open when they're going around checking on their soldiers. They're physically, you're constantly worried about stuff. You don't have enough of anything. You don't have enough ammunition. You don't have enough food. You don't have enough medical care for the casualties that are being sustained. And Yeah, it's a relentless kind of worry that eats at you, on top of your own sort of physical danger and risk. And whenever you do lose, whenever you lose your soldiers, you take it personal because you'll think, oh man, I could have done something better if I'd have done this or whatever. So that matters. But I hope that they also have, this wonderful thing that we call the sergeant major, having a veteran soldier, a non-commissioned officer who understands what's going on inside the companies and platoons and literally in the trenches. What a valuable asset that is. Extra set of eyes for the commander. They can pay attention to the supply, to medical evacuation, and they can report back to the commander what's really going on parallel to the official reporting. And I loved it, having a sergeant major that was about my age and that I could complain to, or that I could whine to, or that I could ask, like, what the hell should we be doing here? Now, of course, I would be willing to bet that almost no brigades in the Ukrainian army have all the right people at the right rank or experience for the positions, because we don't have that in the U.S. Army. You don't have it in the British Army. Nobody has it. So you end up with very often, for a variety of reasons, staff officers that are younger or less experienced or have less rank than it calls for in the official table of organization and equipment. And so this is a factor that you're constantly having to deal with as well. And then I don't know the situation over the heads of the brigade commanders. It seems to me that the general staff has actually done a good job adapting within the context of what they're doing. It would have been gut-wrenching for any brigade commander or higher to make a decision to withdraw, especially if you've been fighting somewhere for a long period of time. There's an emotional aspect to this, but then there's a practical sense. Is it better to pull back behind a river or to give up a certain area to be able to live to fight another day? And that also has that really wears on you. That it's exhausting.
Yes, sir. Thanks again for joining us. I have a question about the upcoming NATO summit. I know it's a political question, but it affects military matters. And the question is, from all the things that some people expect to happen on the NATO summit, all the decisions that can be made, what is, in your assessment, the most pressing thing? Is it the accession of Finland and Sweden? Is it the move in strengthening the eastern flank? Or is it, as Gitanas Nausėda, for example, the president of Lithuania, suggested, changing the doctrine of NATO to basically defining Russia as a long-term adversary? What is your outlook on what is going to happen and what should happen according to you?
Well, I have to say that all four of the things you just laid out are exactly the kind of things that need to be done. And my sense is that most of them are going to be agreed here in Madrid, based on kind of the work and the thinking and the things we've seen in advance, what's been discussed, what Secretary General Stoltenberg has already sort of announced. I think that we're going to see a lot of what you just recommended. Look, the alliance is not perfect. I mean, this is the nature of coalitions, is that you've got a variety of nations, each with shared interests, but also their own agenda. At the same time, the alliance is going to add Sweden and Finland. That's going to happen. The United States is going to do what it should have done a long time ago and repair our relationship with Turkey. And we will get this sorted out. It's too bad it's not happening already, but I believe that we will fix this. And Sweden and Finland will join the alliance and make huge impacts. The quality of the military from Sweden and Finland two strong liberal democratic societies, two resilient societies, and it's going to completely change the geometry in the Baltic region and in the high north. So that's going to make us better. I saw earlier today where Secretary General Stoltenberg says that Russia is the most serious and direct threat against the alliance. That's important language for the Secretary General to say that. And so I think that the fact you still got nations that are lined up in a queue, despite the problems that NATO has, you've got nations knocking on the door saying, we want to join NATO. There's nobody knocking on the door of the Kremlin, nobody knocking on the door in Beijing saying, we want to join your team. So I'm actually optimistic. I think that this summit, it will be not fully satisfying in some areas, but I think it will be as consequential or more than the NATO summit in Warsaw back in 2016, which was probably one of the most important summits we've had in decades.
Let's go to Kurt. Yeah, Kurt, to you.
My question is, you read all about the poor morale, the toxic morale, the decimation of the BTGs, the high level of conscripts on the Russian army. You really don't read anything positive except, their superiority in artillery. So my question is, how are they able to take any ground at all with those problems?
Yeah, well, that's a fair question. I think that it's probably good or wise for us to be a little bit more circumspect on kind of discounting all of the Russian forces. I mean, at the end of the day, they have, in fact, achieved some success. They've been in the field. I mean, I'm thinking about, many of the Russian forces that are fighting right now. They would have been deployed for months on the border of Russia and Belarus, of Ukraine and Belarus, much of it during wintertime. And then when the conflict started, so many of them would have been fighting or engaged in combat much of the time since then. That's bone crushing. So there is some resilience in some of these formations, and I think that there probably are in some of them some leaders that are able to get things done. And of course, as well as Ukrainians have fought, we would also be mistaken to assume that all Ukrainians are heroic defenders. Every Ukrainian unit is effective. That would be unnatural. But the effect of endless amounts of artillery just pounding away on bunkers and trench lines and houses, it forces you to withdraw, especially if when critical supply roads get cut, it has an effect. And so you will have to pull people back, or units collapse. So there will be places where the Russians, just through sheer mass, will be able to achieve some progress. But I just don't see them having the ability to make a major breakthrough that could be sustained, where they could make several kilometers in a day. I don't think they're programmed or set up to be able to do that right now.
And they haven't done so for quite a while. The last time they actually made kilometers was when they advanced en route to Kryvyi Rih, where they've been stalled and repelled, quite literally. So,
yeah.
I had a question for both you and Melania, because, Melania obviously has a significant better access to the local, view in that regard. But with those levels of attrition on the one side and the losses of Ukrainian soldiers on the other hand, the Russians make no big progress. How does that impact the Ukrainian view at this point in time? Because as General Hodges just explained, there's no real gain, but it seems like a gain. How does that feel in Ukraine?
Well, you have to take into account the position of both Ukrainian public and Ukrainian military. I'm privileged to communicate with both of these people, groups of people anyway. And we are trying to contain ourselves from being too excited about certain progress we're making. We are very supportive of it, and it's very important that we make these little steps. But on the other side of that is the tragedy and the loss of people we know. So it is taking a huge toll. And the worst part of it is that we're not able to see sort of an end to it in the nearest future, because it's not just about repelling and stopping Russian forces from advancing. It's also, taking back the already occupied territories, which is proving to be quite difficult given, the amount of weapons that we have and Russians have and whatnot. I've spoken to a close friend of mine who's currently in the military in Mykolaiv. It is quite hard there, and he keeps telling me that, we could fight for Kherson. We're not that far away from it if we were given proper weapons, and if we were supplied properly, would be doing that already, but we can't because we are outnumbered in many ways, both in terms of personnel, in terms of arms. So we are remaining hopeful. I mean, everybody is. We believe in our military the same way we always have. It's just the point of war of attrition is to make everybody tired, and to make it, especially for civilians, is for them to feel as if this is A, forever, B, a lost cause. So it's a tough question to ask, because I try not to judge the situation from my perspective, since it's a little bit, it's subjective. I'm way too emotionally invested in this, so I'm trying to talk to as many people as possible. But yeah, even though we are very proud, and even though we can see the progress, and even though we know that eventually it's going to be okay, we're hopeful. We're still it's a very careful optimism here. So we know for a fact it's going to take a lot of time still, and it's sadly going to take a lot more dead soldiers and dead civilians, and that is kind of the biggest issue now, is that people are getting very frustrated about it. But nobody's going to. Ukrainian public would never agree to any kind of secessions or any kind of I don't think. I have not seen any proper kind of sociological studies in that regard, what Ukrainians think about, some kind of peace deal and whatnot. But I have this feeling that any kind of peace deal on Russia's terms would not be accepted by the public and by the military. So yeah, it's tough, but nevertheless, we do what we can with our foundations, with our volunteers, with fundraising. And so I think we're prepared for this marathon. It's just a matter of being, careful about our optimism here.
Understood. I mean, as you said, marathon, that brings us back to the topic of logistics. And I just wanted to highlight this. A few days ago, Ronald T. here in Estonia published an article, and I wanted to read out that quote because it pertains to exactly what General Hodges had said before. And this is about push and pull logistics. What Melania just evidences the constant cry-outs by Ukrainian armed forces, TDFs and the likes, for additional support, weapon systems and the likes. And that's classic pull. Ronald wrote, the combination of push logistics and centralized command makes Russia's military logistic system even less responsive in the face of the unpredictable and inevitable variations in supply encountered in highly fluid battle spaces. Let that sink in. The Ukrainian armed forces under their command are creating exactly that level of ambiguity. And they're providing for more fluid battle space wherever they can. Donbass is obviously the opposite. Now, how does that logistics culture of the Ukrainian military as of today differ, General Hodges? How do you see them operating in comparison to the Russians?
Well, the first imperative of logistics is anticipation. The best logisticians are already thinking about what's going to be needed without being told what's needed, because commanders are in the fight and they won't always anticipate what they'll be needing down the road. So I think the general staff's logistics apparatus is having to grow seriously here while in the fight. My sense was that before February, it wasn't at the level of robustness and resilience and capacity that it is now, and that it needed to be. The distribution network inside Ukraine was not designed to be moving hundreds of thousands of tons of ammunition and supplies and heavy equipment under pressure from vicinity of Lviv all the way to the Donbass. I mean, it hadn't had to do that before, certainly not since World War II. And so the transportation infrastructure, rail, highways, bridges, the forklifts, all the stuff that's needed, I think is a limiting factor on Ukraine's ability to get all the new stuff into the fight. And this is where I really would like to see us, if we're not going to change our policy about having boots on the ground, like great U.S. Army or British Army logisticians, then let's get a commercial logistics company that can bring in expertise as well as hundreds of trucks and forklifts to help to augment what Ukraine is doing now to move stuff in and around the country to where it's needed. I think this was something that would have a significant impact. We relied on commercial logistics in Iraq and Afghanistan for 20 years, bringing in all the stuff that we needed. I think this is something that's worth considering. Now, the good news here, of course, is that I think we get a little better every week at figuring out how do we get the things that the nations are providing. How do you get it to where it's needed? 18 Airborne Corps is part of the U.S. effort in Europe. I mean, is managing all of this. I think that we're certainly smarter now than we were even a month ago about what's needed, where it has to go, how do you move things there. And the Russians, while they clearly have no problem launching missiles into a shopping center or an apartment building, they don't seem very good at disrupting the lines of communication, the logistics network. And I think that we're fortunate in that regard.
Yeah, we just, CJ, maybe you want to highlight this. We had a conversation a few minutes ago. We received some data on the provisioning of Russian artillery, and yet again, logistics are key. CJ?
Yeah, a quick update. Here's that the firm's data from satellites confirms that in the last basically 48 hours, there have been almost no deep strikes on Ukrainian territory in terms of from rocket-launched artillery or towed artillery, and all of the fires have been on the Russian side of the line of control, which is great news. I mean, it's maybe happening a bit quicker than I would have thought, but at least the artillery battle is clearly shifting in the other direction, which of course is necessary for anything else to happen.
Yeah, so there has been 2 cruise missile strikes from preliminary reports. The shopping mall in Kremenchuk in Poltava Oblast was struck. It is completely burned down as of now, and for now the official figures are at least 2 civilians dead, more than 20 injured, but because the entire building was on fire, and it's a huge shopping mall, the President Zelensky estimated that more than 1,000 people were inside at the time of the strike. These kind of, and there has been this overall motive that, Russian cruise missiles, they just missed the kind of the structure they've been aiming at and mistakenly landed at the shopping mall, which makes little to no sense to me. Maybe you can correct me on that, but those are high precision weapons. They're designed to hit direct targets. So in my mind, I have no idea how this could have been a near hit or miss of any kind. So for now, we're still waiting for the updates on the amount of casualties in that shopping mall. But yeah, as I've said before, the president has informed on his official Telegram channel that They estimate that more than 1,000 people might have been inside at the time of the attack, so we're still waiting.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
potentially it's a terrible death toll on the civilian target. To you, Axel.
Yeah, I was just about to highlight that is, and I think General Hodges also stressed it at the beginning, that is the terror strategy they are running because they have nothing else to do. They lack the precision-guided ammunition, they lack the capacity to do different strikes, but they do know that they can hit both the civil population as well as Western opinion with this. But I tend to believe, General Hodges, it seems to me that the opinion in the West is turning given what they're seeing, especially when we can highlight that they're not making progress in Donbass when pushed, when their artillery is stopping.
Yeah, I think I would imagine that the G7, they're sitting around the table there, and these kind of things happen, and it has to be infuriating for them. I mean, how foolish, the idea that we don't want to humiliate Putin when this is going on. So I think this is going to harden people like President Macron, Chancellor Scholz, Prime Minister Draghi. That's going to harden them towards any sense of somehow Putin is a guy that you can negotiate with, or that we want to have a ceasefire. And so this a tactic by the Russians, thinking that they can put pressure on all of us, that we would do anything just to avoid any further killing like this, is going to backfire. And I think German population, the French, and so on, realize what's at stake here, and that it won't stop unless we do stop them. And so my prediction is that we're going to see, I could be proven totally wrong. My prediction is that we are going to see a resolve coming out of the G7 and the NATO summit. It's about defeating Russia. I mean, smashing them and making sure that they cannot keep doing this.
I love what you just said. I don't want to, smashing them. That's exactly it. Joseph.
Hi, General Hodges. Thanks so much for speaking to us. I've really appreciated all your insights. I just wanted to go back briefly to what you were discussing in terms of Ukraine transitioning to more of a counteroffensive posture. So in terms of maybe the next 1 to 2 months, if you're looking at it from the Ukrainian side, do you think they need any additional capabilities to successfully conduct counteroffensives? And what do you think realistically NATO and other friendly countries could provide to help Ukraine most efficiently in the next 1 or 2 months to prepare them for counteroffensives? Thank you.
Yeah, well, great question. Of course, I don't know exactly what the capabilities are in terms of mobile, armored formations, infantry fighting vehicles, the kind of things that would be needed if there was going to be a successful counterattack. And for sure, they will need a lot more rockets and artillery ammunition that would be part of any sort of a counteroffensive. But I think that what the West can do, in addition to the obvious things like that, intelligence, helping to identify vulnerabilities, location of Russian reserves, understanding what's going on the Russian side, that would be an important part of this. Also, if there's something we could do that would help take pressure away, I mean, whether it's a big NATO exercise or a U.S. something somewhere else on the periphery that would create a problem for the Russians, I really am anxious to see us repair our relationship with Turkey so that we can operate more effectively in the Black Sea region, for example. Turkey, of course, has, under its authority, the Montreux Convention, has blocked Russian ships from going through the straits, and unofficially they have asked us not to ask to go through the straits into the Black Sea. And I think there's other things that we could do that would be useful as part of an overall approach for a Ukrainian counteroffensive. Now, there's huge risk involved because the Ukrainian General Staff, of course, they've got to pick the time, they got to pick the place, they have to conserve capabilities. that these brigade commanders we were talking about earlier would love to have in the fight. But if you're going to have a counteroffensive that's going to achieve something at the operational level, you've got to take risk in order to build up those capabilities and preserve some operational security as well. I hope that this is and I hate to say hope, but since I'm a spectator, I don't know for sure that they are doing that process and working out how and where they might do it, deception, other things that could be done. I actually have a lot of confidence in the Ukrainian general staff. These are tough guys. They are clever warfighters. I mean, without too much help, they have stopped Russia for 4 months. So I think that they'll be able to do what their grandfathers did in the Second World War, which is launch a successful counterstrike.
And
Very
one
good
last
point.
question. Just in terms of, we know that there's been fuel shortages at the civilian level. We know the military seems to have enough to conduct their broad operations, but in terms of an offensive operations, it seems like it would take a lot more fuel. So do you think that this is maybe a potential issue for Ukrainian offensive action? And is there anything that allies can do to sort of turn the fuel tap on a little higher? Thank you. And I'll hop down. Thank you.
Yeah, well, this is exactly what we were talking about earlier, the importance of, or the imperative of anticipation. They would have started building up fuel supplies to sustain a counteroffensive if that's in the works. They would have to have done that and preserve it, even though it's desperately needed in other places. But this is what the priorities are about. A very short war story. I was a brigade commander during the invasion of Iraq in 2003. I was commanded 1st Brigade of the 101st. Very proud in history, and I was fired up about what we were doing. And then my mission, I was diverted to protect the MSR, the main supply route outside of Najaf, in order to allow the 3rd Infantry Division to build up their fuel supply for the final attack on Baghdad, because the Saddam Fedayeen kept coming out of Najaf and destroying the 5,000-gallon tankers full of fuel that were needed to keep Abrams tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles moving forward. And I remember being so doggone frustrated. I thought, there's no glory in guarding my main supply route. How stupid was I that was an essential part of enabling our U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Division to be able to launch this attack on Baghdad. They had to build up the fuel necessary to do it, to sustain combat operations with armored vehicles. And the role for my brigade was to protect that MSR and to keep the Saddam Fedayeen from coming out of Najaf. And so that's why it's kind of burned into my memory, the importance of taking risk and using resources to build up things such as fuel and ammunition for your main effort.
Thanks very much. We have a number of hands up. I hope that you still have a bit of time for us. I also recognize that Peter Doran has joined, who I tried to get up earlier, but fortunately he has joined, given the fact that you said the magic word Montreux. He came up right away. How much time do you have left?
I've got about 15 minutes.
Oh, that's fantastic. Then let's go through the people who have been waiting patiently, and then Peter and CJ and I will end it. All right, so let's start with Dryfly, then we'll go to Phil, then Alex, then Olga, and let's cycle through, mindful of the time.
Hello, I got a quick question for you. Do you have any insights into the recent staff changes on the Russian side? I mean, we realize that they've been kind of firing Wally Pips over and over again, trying to find a Lou Gehrig, but they really haven't done it. I was just wondering I was wondering if you have any insights. Like, do you guys have a playbook or whatever it is, where you kind of know who they have on the bench? And I ask that because it looks to me like they've changed strategies again, going from the grind to more of an air sort of Christmas bombing London Blitz type strategy, which I don't think is going to work. But it sounds like, as they change players, they change strategy. So they went from blitz, they went from that quick blitzkrieg, then to the grind, and now it looks like they're going to air. If you have any insights, I'd just like to hear it, and I'll listen. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, and I love the baseball analogy. I think that they are searching for a commander that can save the day for them. But the problem is, you can bring in Napoleon or Alexander the Great or George Patton, And I don't think that they've got the kind of force that can be changed. I mean, the system that they have established, the Russian system, is based on units, specific units being given specific tasks and then told, you go do this task. And in a way, it's almost a mathematical sort of thing. And so when there's a problem where the math no longer works, then the system is stopped. And so having commanders with a flexibility of mind can make the necessary adaptations at all the necessary levels. So far, I don't see evidence that that exists. That does not mean that they don't have tough, smart, super courageous commanders, but I don't see them having the institutional sort of flexibility to make necessary adjustments that would be required here. It's hard. I was recently in a place where I should have been able to find out, kind of answering specifically your question, but even there, they're not sure who's actually in charge. I would have expected that Shoigu and Gerasimov would have been sacked by now. They haven't, which is interesting. It could be that, for political reasons, Shoigu's still in post, and because Gerasimov seems to be the only, I hate to call a guy like that stable, but in terms of a professional soldier to kind of keep it all together, he still has a job. But you remember it was a couple of months ago, this guy that was supposedly the butcher of Syria, General Vornikov or whatever, he was brought in. He's pretty much disappeared or been sidelined. A new commander's been brought in. I don't know, frankly, who it is, and it doesn't seem that they have established a single joint commander who could task the Air Force and the Navy as well as land forces to get the joint effects that would make a huge difference for them if they were able to bring all that together. So I think they really are at their default, which is attrition with artillery. And if you heard what I offered about it earlier in the program, the four strategic tasks that they're focused on, only one of them deals with the actual battlefield right now, and that's just to do whatever's necessary to achieve some sort of victory now.
Thank you. Let's move to Phil and then Alex.
Thank you, and thank you, General Hodge, for your service and your amazing insights. I just had a question kind of about logistics, because we went over it so heavily, and it's so important in your, your 4 points that we need moving forward. Is kind of the electronic warfare capabilities of Russia have improved from the beginning of the war till now, where even the Ukrainians are saying that some of the drones are less effective because of the electronic warfare capabilities. The other thing, cyber warfare is important in Russia, and they just initiated a cyber attack on Lithuania today that was announced. The question is, are we doing enough to address those issues to help Ukraine during the next phase of the war? Thank you.
Yeah, excellent question. I had expected that the Russian electronic warfare capability would be much more effective from the very beginning because of the capabilities that they had put on display back in 2014, 15 and 16, and recognizing our own shortcomings in the U.S. Military because of what we've been doing the last 20 years. But it does seem now that they have begun to improve or make better use of their capabilities. I also have heard open source that many of the drones that we've provided are not effective in a GPS denied environment. They're not effective for obvious reasons. And so I'm going to make a pretty informed guess that we are going to school on all this, that we're paying close attention to what works, what doesn't work, bandwidth issues, range issues. How can we harden the links from ground control stations to drones so that they are not so easily dropped? So that sort of effort is underway, but it's not the kind of thing that would be advertised.
Appreciate it, and thank you. By the way, Olga, please, you go first. I apologize. I overlooked you because on my screen, not all avatars showed up. Olga.
All right, great. Thank you. Thank you so much, General Hodges, for your service and for your support of Ukraine. You've been in NATO. You've been, Secretary of NATO. And what kind of concerns me, and I think also a lot of Ukrainians also and other people around the world, is that before the war was started, Putin was warned multiple times by General Secretary Stoltenberg not to dare to touch NATO, not a single NATO country. It was repeated over and over to the point that there was an impression that go ahead with Ukraine, do whatever, but not an inch of NATO country. Unfortunately, the leaders also repeating similar messages that God forbid you touch, any other country other than Ukraine. Not saying that, but basically implying. In the morning when Putin invaded, in his speech, he made a threat to the leaders of the world, basically, of the leaders of the other countries, not to help Ukraine. And of course, the objective, we all know, is to squeeze Ukraine from three directions, and Ukraine will collapse. If you cut the supply, the oxygen, it's easy to commit suicide. Easy to commit genocide. And, we know it didn't work out, of course. But now going back to those words that we heard from General Stellenberg, and maybe it was the right thing to do, I don't know. But I have a feeling that we could probably, or it could be said in ambiguous terms, not saying everybody understood NATO will not come to help Ukraine. It was clear. It was said many times in München, in other meetings, but basically saying to Putin, I think I'm not really in power make decisions, but ambiguity probably would be helpful. Well, nothing can be changed, but in the present time, now we're seeing that they are shooting wherever the missile lands, let's say if it's small, so be it, buildings, so be it. What could be the message? We know that there will be no message, that NATO will come. But NATO somehow is involved, countries of NATO, in spite of all those threats. So changing the language, what do you think would be helpful? Because informational warfare is still going on. And by the way, we are on this space as a part of it. Thank you so much, sir.
Okay. Well, this is a good one with which I can wrap up, because we have made mistakes. I think there's too much saying what we're not going to do that, in effect, tells the Kremlin what their limits are. It opens it up for them. So from the very beginning, when the president, despite all the good stuff that the administration is doing, when he says we're not going to have boots on the ground, why would we say that? And I understand why they keep talking about, every square inch of or square meter of NATO is going to be protected. Okay, that's important to say, but it does create the impression that you just described, that as if other things are going to be less protected. So I can't explain or justify all that, but I imagine it's part of a huge political and strategic debate inside all the capitals and inside the alliance. How do we stay unified? Because keeping the alliance together is very important here. How do we get to Ukraine what it needs to help make sure that they can defeat Russia, but still avoid escalation beyond what's happening now? And so these are, it sucks if you're an infantry soldier in Ukraine getting pounded with artillery, but if you can step back and think strategically, this is important also for all the other nations. And so trying to find that balance of making sure that Ukraine wins, that Russia is weakened so it can no longer threaten others, and making sure in the meantime that we're doing everything we possibly can so that Russia does not think for a second that it could then roll on into Lithuania, for example, or Romania. So these are all very, very difficult discussions that are being had. On the plus side, I think when Russia does something like what they did today, that will cause our leaders in the West to take the next step and to push back more and to be more confident that Russia really cannot escalate beyond what they're doing right now, and that we need to do even more, to do everything we possibly can, and people that need to talk about Ukraine winning, not just surviving or Russia losing, but Ukraine winning, and then breaking the back of Russian forces so that they cannot threaten anybody else for a very long time.
Much appreciated. We have a quick question, I think, from Peter Doran as well.
Ben, I wanted to thank you so much for joining the space again. It's always great to have you and hear you again, sir. Quick question. I have been in multiple conversations in Washington over the last 10 days. At each one of these conversations, the prospect of a Ukrainian defeat or the prospect of allowing the Germans or the French or others to push Zelensky to the peace table and force him to accept a bad peace has been starting to be anticipated as a possible outcome of this war. I have disagreed with that assessment. I think it's wrong. If you were in those conversations, and you know those conversations, what would you say during those discussions? Should we accept
that? I would say exactly what you probably said, Peter, is that that's absolutely the wrong course of action. That right now, to make a deal with any kind of negotiation with the president of the Russian Federation, what evidence is there that they would ever live up to any agreement? Number two, any sort of ceasefire would only cement the gains that they've achieved through their aggression, and then they would just sit and wait for us to lose interest again, and we pick it back up next year or somewhere else. So there are zero positive outcomes for Ukraine, for democracy, for the West, to do any of that. And I think that that I could be overstating it, but I think these attacks that happened Sunday and today should begin to erode the smug confidence of people, the geniuses who say we need to push Ukraine to accept some kind of a deal, to go ahead and let Putin have some land to satisfy him. That reveals a absolute total lack of understanding of Putin, of the Kremlin, and of Russia. Every war, and Peter, you're an historian, every war has times where, what we thought we were going to lose, things were really bad. I mean, think of the American Civil War. President Lincoln, every night for 4 years, must have just thought, my God, nothing but casualties. How are we going to win? But will. And he understood what had to be done and how to keep the American people focused. So did President Roosevelt. And I think this is when leadership is so important, to keep everybody reminding them what this is about. This is not about Donbass. I mean, this is about the building security in Europe. It's about all the stuff we say we care about. And for sure, the Chinese are watching. The Iranians are watching. The North Koreans are watching. And if all of us together cannot stop Russia, then I think we're going to have a lot bigger problems.
All right. Mindful of your time. Thank you very much for being with us today yet again. Who do you think returns to this program earlier? Someone telling us that the Atacams are in theater, or would you be joining us after the NATO summit again?
Is that a question to me?
Yes.
Look, I love the format, and I'm always impressed with the questions, and I always learn from these things because it, I can live in my own little bubble here and in Frankfurt and miss things. So this is extremely valuable for me. So I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. All righty. Then we shall hope to have you back again. Please, my dear friends, please give General Ben Hodges a good hand. And thank you very much for taking the time. It has been splendid yet again, and we shall hope to speak to you soon again.
Great. Thanks, guys. 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 Great.